Hi, witches. I'm Blair Bathory, and this is the Something Scary podcast. Thank you so much for being here. Whether this is your first time, or you're one of the brave souls who join us every week, I wanted to quickly come on and say that I'm thinking of all my friends and family in Florida right now as I am sitting recording this. Myself and my family are bracing for the impacts of Hurricane Milton. I'm actually looking out onto the lake, and it is truly a dark and stormy night ahead of us. By the time this podcast comes out, the storm will have passed, but I hope everyone stayed safe and their friends and family are okay. And I'm thinking of you, my home state, my fellow Floridians. We'll get through this together. We all love a good thunderstorm, an excuse to find a cozy spot and read a good book, or listen to something spooky. But when the wind howls through the trees and the rain falls like a warning from the heavens, fear can find a way creeping into our minds. It's in the cover of the rainfall and thunderclap that the ordinary can become the extraordinary. And all things creepy and supernatural can make their way into our world. So when you're curling up in your bed during the storm, make sure you sleep with one eye open. First, a dark and strange night, then a deadly game. Finally, in our last story, a trek into the darkness. Before we get to our stories, I wanted to ask if you would take a minute to send this podcast to someone you know who loves horror or is excited to get in the mood for spooky season. We know there are hundreds of podcasts out there, and the biggest influence on what people listen to is what their friends recommend. You can also rate and comment on our podcast on Spotify and YouTube, so let us know what you think. I read every single comment from y'all. Thanks so much. We are incredibly grateful for all of the listeners around the world. So, want to hear something scary? One dark and stormy night. When you choose not to believe in the supernatural has a cruel way of making you change your mind. Like in this story inspired by Marley. I had always hated anything supernatural or paranormal. It's all fake. That's why I had always hated Halloween. It was for little kids and candy and bored the crap out of me. So I wasn't bothered that the weather forecast for that Halloween was for thunderstorms. What did bother me was that I had to leave my apartment to work that night, and unfortunately, my car battery had died the night before. I meant to have someone help me jumpstart it earlier that day, but it completely slipped my mind. Rain poured down in sheets, soaking me the moment I stepped outside. The cold drops stung my face like needles, and my hair clung to my head in wet clumps. Each step felt heavier as my sneakers slapped against the waterlogged pavement, but I kept going. Shoulders hunched against the storm. This was a wild storm, even for that time of year. The weather felt like it was punishing everyone, but for what? I wasn't sure. As I approached the record shack, the store where I worked, something caught my eye. Our sign had been spray painted over in blood red, as if someone had taken the can and smashed it across the storefront. The bright color dripped down in long streaks, illuminated by the streetlight that flickered above me. Great, I muttered, squinting through the rain. I stepped inside, relieved to finally escape the downpour. The store was warm, but a damp chill still clung to me. I pulled off my soaked coat and it hung on a hook by the desk. Suddenly, the door slammed shut behind me with a deafening bang. I jumped and spun around, my heart racing. Nobody was there. I thought it might have been Craig, the dude who had the shift before me, but it wasn't. It was also like him to take off early. The soft patter of rain against the window was interrupted by a clang of metal from the back room. I flinched. Craig? Is that you? It's not funny, I called out, my voice shaky, even though I tried to make it sound firm. I was never scared, at least that's what I told myself. The clang came again, louder this time, reverberating through the store. My ears rang as I hesitated, staring down the dark hallway that led me to the back room. Every fiber of my being screamed to leave, but my feet moved forward, slow and cautious. Hello? My voice trembled as I whispered into the silence. Something cold and wet brushed against the back of my neck. I froze. My breath caught in my throat. Slowly, I turned around, and there it was, an arm. Hanging limply behind me, pale blue and swollen, as if the blood had been cut off long before it was severed. My stomach lurched. I stumbled back, my mind struggling to make sense of it. A low groan echoed from the darkness, and then I saw it. A tall figure stood in the shadows, cloaked in black. Its lifeless eyes stared back at me, dark and hollow, like two bottomless pits. It gripped a scythe in one hand, the blade glinting under the faint light of the store's neon sign. My chest tightened as it took a step forward, slow and deliberate, the scythe scraping against the floor with a sharp hiss. I backed away, tripping over a stack of broken records, sending them crashing to the floor. The severed arm grazed my face as I fell, and I gagged, bile rising in my throat. The figure loomed closer, its grotesque mouth hanging open as it bent down, inches from my face. A noise came from its throat, a deep, guttural rasp that rattled my bones. I could feel something pulling at me, inside me. My mouth opened in a silent scream as I watched, horrified, as a stream of black smoke began to seep from my lips. It was pulling my soul. I could feel it. Weakly, I kicked at him, my foot grazing the figure's face. It barely flinched, but the brief contact jolted me enough to scramble to my feet. With every ounce of strength I had, I turned and ran. I burst through the door and into the rain-soaked night, gasping for air. But something was wrong. The record store, it was gone. There was no sign of it. No glowing neon, no vandalized sign. Just a cracked, moldy, and abandoned brick building standing in its place. I collapsed in the parking lot, my body shaking with exhaustion. The rain pounded down harder, drenching me to the bone. Mixing with the tears streaming down my face, headlights flickered through the downpour, and a gray car pulled up beside me. A tall, old man rolled down the window and leaned out. "God, what happened to you, kid?" His voice was gruff, but I couldn't find the words to answer. Just get me somewhere safe," I choked out, my voice barely above a whisper. He nodded. He helped me into the back seat, and I slumped against the window, my body weak. I closed my eyes, letting the sound of the rain lull me into a strange, uneasy calm. But when I opened them again, I glanced up at the rearview mirror and saw the old man's reflection. His eyes, dark, black, empty, just like the figure in the store. Thankfully, he just dropped me a block away from my house. I wasn't going to give him my exact address. That night, that thunderstorm, I still hate Halloween, but I am now 100% a believer in the supernatural. Have you ever experienced something terrifying you couldn't explain? What was your experience? We love hearing your stories and sometimes put them in the podcast. Send us an email and your story at somethingscary@snarled.com. Once you hear footsteps coming from you, it's already too late. Like in this story inspired by Kat. It was a dark and stormy night. The kind of night where the world outside seemed to vanish into the blackness, leaving only the sounds of rain hammering against the windows and thunder rumbling in the distance. Inside their cozy living room, an old couple sat in silence, watching television as the wind howled. The flickering glow of the screen was the only light in the house. They had been together for decades, and nights like this were nothing new. There was an odd tension in the air, as if the storm was trying to swallow them whole. Still, they tried to ignore it, sinking deeper into the worn cushions of their couch, the steady drone of the TV providing a false sense of security. Then came the sound, a sharp, unmistakable crack from the basement. Glass. The sound echoed through the quiet house, slicing through the soft murmur of the storm. The couple tensed. For a long moment, they sat frozen, as if the world had stopped turning. Neither of them wanted to acknowledge it, but they both knew they had heard it. Slowly, as if drawn by an unseen force, They stood and made their way toward the basement door. Each step felt heavy, burdened by the growing sense of dread. The stairs leading down seemed longer than usual, stretching into the dark unknown below. At the bottom of the stairs, they hesitated. The light from above barely illuminated the basement, casting long, distorted shadows across the floor. In the dim light, they saw it. A delicate glass doll, shattered on the cold concrete. Its face, once sweet and childlike, was now in pieces, the porcelain shards glittering like broken teeth. The wife shuddered. She had always hated dolls, especially this one. Something about its eyes had always creeped her out, but they had kept it locked away with other forgotten relics in the basement. Now, here it was broken, yet somehow still watching them. The husband bent down, gathering the fragile pieces. His hands trembled as he fit the jagged shards together like a twisted puzzle. With each piece, the unease in the air thickened, pressing down on them. The doll's one remaining eye gleamed in the half-light, as if mocking their efforts to restore it. They should have left it broken. Back upstairs, they tried to return to their normal routine, but the unease lingered. The storm outside grew fiercer, the wind now wailing like a banshee, rattling the windows in their frames. Then, without warning, the lights flickered and went out. Darkness swallowed the room, leaving them in silence, save for the relentless pounding of the rain. A sense of dread began to seep into the house, crawling up from the basement like a living thing. The couple sat in the darkness, waiting for the storm to pass, when a new sound emerged. Soft, delicate, like tiny footsteps. The noise came from the basement stairs, slow, methodical, approaching. They listened, hearts pounding in unison, their breath caught in their throats. The footsteps were too light to be an adult, too precise to be random. Something, or someone, was making its way toward them. Then, from the darkness, a voice. It was faint at first, barely a whisper, but unmistakably a child. The voice sang a faint, lilting rhyme. There was something terribly wrong about the sound, a disembodied voice in the dead of night, creeping closer with every word.
1, 2, I'm coming for you.
The air grew cold. The couple huddled together, too terrified to move. The storm outside seemed distant now, drowned out by the horror unfolding inside their home.
3, 4, better lock your door.
The rhyme continued, and with it, the footsteps grew louder, closer. The wife could feel her heart hammering in her chest, every beat echoing in her ears. It was as if the walls themselves were closing in, suffocating them in a grip of pure terror.
5, 6, better get out, quick.
But there was no escape. The voice was everywhere, surrounding them, filling the room with its cold malice. They could feel it, whatever was coming. It was drawing near, and there was nothing they could do to stop it. Suddenly, the basement door creaked open, the sound cutting through the air like a knife. They turned toward it, eyes wide with terror, but the darkness revealed nothing, only the soft scuff of small footprints on the floor.
7, 8, I'm almost here.
In the dim light of a lightning flash, they saw it. Standing at the doorway was the doll, no longer broken, no longer lifeless. Its glass eyes sparkled, and its porcelain mouth, once painted in a sweet smile, had twisted into something unnatural, a grin that promised nothing but doom.
9, 10, it's too late.
The last words echoed in their ears as the doll stepped forward, its tiny feet barely making a sound on the wooden floor. It smiled up at them, the room filled with a sudden, bone-chilling cold. When the police arrived hours later, responding to the desperate call, they found the house silent. The storm had passed, leaving only the faint drip of water from the eaves. They knocked, but there was no answer. The door, locked from the inside, had to be broken down. Inside, the house was still and quiet, empty. But on the living room table sat 3 glass dolls, one of a man, one of a woman, and one of a little girl, their blank faces staring out at the world with an eerie calm. The couple was gone. Only their reflections remained, frozen forever in glass. Would you have tried to fix the doll or left it broken? Do you have any haunted items at your home? Which one scares you the most? We often think going to a place of refuge will be safe, but sometimes it's like going straight into hell, like in this story inspired by Jordan. Joshua received a letter from his lonely widowed mother. She wished for him to visit and keep her company before the worst of the year's weather made the trek possible. He packed up his bag and set out on the long walk. She lived a considerable distance away, but it was still manageable on foot, and being a man of humble means, he could not afford to charter a carriage. Making his way, he would occasionally stop only when hunger and fatigue demanded he find food. Thunderheads loomed, and the sky darkened gradually. Being familiar with the route, the traveler knew he was walking near a floodplain, and that the circumstances did not bode well. He would have to abandon the fastest path to his mother's and detour to one of the remote hamlets before he was washed away by the mudslides the area was infamous for. What was afternoon seemed like midnight. Such was the magnitude of the unseasonable storm. Thunder cracked like a splitting oak, and rain pelted him like stone. As the young traveler hurried through the overgrown trails leading to the seldom-seen hamlet, branches scratched at his face and clothes, thoroughly ripping them at the pant legs and sleeves. He could only pray that one of the notoriously private inhabitants would grant him a night's stay as he entered the clearing. It was no surprise when he was turned away from the first two huts. At the third hovel, an older man answered. It was hard for the young man to ascertain his age. He lay somewhere in the boundary between middle and old age, learning his lesson from the first two attempts. The younger man quickly condensed his plight and asked for lodging. The older man obliged him, letting out a hacking cough. He was a field hand, he explained, and apologized for his shack's modest furnishing. As the host admitted his guest and showed him to his room, the traveler noticed the man possessed an unusual parlor. Since hospitality was a rarity in these parts, improper decorum dictated that to make mention of this would be rude. He made no comment. The traveler settled in for the night and was thankful when slumber finally came to him. The sound of hammered nails and splintering wood startled the young man awake. Rubbing his bleary eyes, he got up to investigate. The young man heard the creaking before he saw him. It made him jump no less. The old man sat in a rocking chair in the darkness. What's going on? He managed to stutter, his voice hoarse with exhaustion. Think nothing of it, dear guest. They are only building a house nearby for a newlywed couple, the old man rasped. This did not sit right with the wayfarer. With what limited knowledge he had of barn raisings, there were immediate construction concerns. God above, at this hour, there is barely enough light, even with a full moon, and the ground must surely be muddy, he screamed to himself in his head. The wayfarer bit his tongue. You should rest, young man. Hours like these are not for travelers such as yourself, he said, punctuating the sentence with a chesty cough. I'm sure you'll need the strength come morning as the storm has abated. Worry not for the community. It will see to its own needs. Sleep did not come again for the farmhand's dear guest. Morning could not come soon enough, so he waited for what he could approximate as dawn. As he rose from the cot, he headed toward a nearby window. He found the light came in scattered beams. Odd, he thought. This is but a humble abode, surely there is no artisan windows. Either out of disbelief or foolishness, it took moments longer than it should have for his eyes to register the truth. The windows were boarded shut. He rushed to the door, its hinges not giving whatsoever. He then slammed his weight against it, but it did not budge. It could have only been barricaded from the outside. The young man turned to his once gentle-seeming host and began to threaten him. The old farmhand just looked at him with an awful grin. Do what you will. Either way, I will not go out of this world alone, he said, with a phlegm-choked cackle. An acrid black stench snaked its way into the room, the smell of pitch. The young man froze. The cold reception, the farmhand's complexion and cough, the windows and door being boarded from the outside, and now the intensifying smell of charred wood. He cursed himself for not realizing sooner. The village was purging the plague-stricken. The guest now felt as if he was plunged into hell without warning. The flames were quick to spread across the ramshackled abode like dancing dragon's breath. The farmhand was content to let the flames envelop him until the pain became so unbearable that he involuntarily fell to the ground, screaming and croaking. The young traveler was backed into a corner by the conflagration, maddeningly swatting at the embers, catching his clothes alight. Every nerve fiber began to scream with a white-hot intensity matching that of the furniture. With no other choice, he sprinted through the inferno until he hit one of the hut's smoldering walls. He threw himself against it, again and again, the combination of searing heat and adrenaline peeling away any and all thoughts besides wanting to desperately live. He did not think of his mother nor God, nor did he spare a thought for the awful sight of a man burning alive mere moments ago. As his weight bounced again and again off the wall, he heard a cracking sound. Whether it was the wall before him or the roof about to collapse, he didn't care. He just had to get out. The villagers were startled when a blistered form burst from the roaring blaze. It fell and tumbled wildly, rolling in the mud until the flames were smothered. Forgetting all about the risk of plague and their grim purpose, they could only stare in awe as the badly burned man staggered to his feet. His body was grotesque, blistered skin fused with the remnants of tattered clothing. It was impossible to tell if his right arm was broken or dislocated, and his ears and part of his nose were burned away, leaving him unrecognizable. For a moment, some villagers faltered, driven by fear of contagion and consumed by self-preservation. They hadn't considered the cruelty of their actions. They exchanged uneasy glances as if, in the face of the traveler's suffering, their conviction had cracked. The traveler swayed, barely standing, his vision blurred with pain. But one thought rose to the surface. His mother. She was still waiting, far away, unaware that her son might never arrive. He had set out to be at her side before the storms made travel impossible, before loneliness swallowed her whole. Now, he wondered if she would ever know what became of him. His charred lips cracked open as if to speak, but no words came. His last conscious thought was not of anger or even the betrayal of the villagers. It was of his mother, sitting in her small home, wondering why her son had never arrived. And then, as his broken body gave out, darkness claimed him. How far would you go to help a loved one? What would you do if you were trapped in this type of danger? What had overtaken the traveler? This week's podcast stories were edited by Sarah Lukasiewicz, narration by Blair Bathory, audio edited and mixed by Fitz Harris, additional audio editing by Calvin Linderman, produced by Anna Villalobos, executive produced by Gail Gilman, music by Sapphire Sindalo and Calvin Linderman.